What's going on, man? Welcome back to the basement. I'm Ron, and we have another week of football in the books, which means it's time to talk through our top 10 lessons learned for week 14 of the fantasy football season, where we look at what happened in week 13, we apply it moving forward into week 14, and talk through what we learned, our observations, takeaways, all of that for fantasy football purposes. Now, with all that being said, we have a lot to get into today. As always, if you enjoy, make sure down below, subscribe, leave a like. Let's go. All right, so our first takeaway, or actually, I'm going to do a little bit, something that I just thought of that I didn't write down. This will be like our first mini takeaway. Weather matters in fantasy football. Hand up. We had our sneaky starts video on Friday that didn't do super well. We had Brevin Jordan, which was a good call, but outside of Brevin Jordan, not a great day. We had Marquise Brown. Everyone in the Steelers-Cardinals game sucked. I ended up having a team or two where I had Josh Allen sitting for the bye, and I started Kenny Pickett instead. Of course, he gets hurt, but that game was like, I think it got rain delayed twice. Of course, you had the Chargers-Patriots game where if you started any Chargers, they all sucked. Weather matters, and I don't know, maybe it was just me, but until Sunday morning, it wasn't really on my radar that like the Patriots-Chargers game was going to be an issue or that the Steelers-Cardinals game would be an issue. So just something to look at moving forward, like as we kind of get deeper into the season where like the elements are really going to come into play, where you're going to have some like cold, windy games probably in Cleveland. Just something to be on top of every week moving forward. I know that like for sure it's something you should be thinking about, but I think this was a good reminder that it's that time of year where weather does matter. So it's something to look at in fantasy football. Now, our first real fantasy football takeaway is let's talk about Jordan Love one last time. We talked about him last week. I said let's have a discussion. Let's open up a dialogue about Jordan Love. And then he comes out here and absolutely hangs his nuts on Monday Night Football or Sunday Night Football. And as a Jets fan, I couldn't be more jealous, all right? All of you lucky guys out there, okay, I get the Colts were screwed with Andrew Luck, but if you get a decade of Peyton Manning and then you get Andrew Luck, and then you're a Packers fan where you get Brett Favre, Aaron Rodgers, and now Jordan Love. I know that Jordan Love's not in the same bucket as those guys, but just be thankful, man. I haven't had a quarterback even as good as Jordan Love since Chad Pennington. All right, so if you are a Packers fan out there, I know the team's young and they weren't living up to expectations early on in the season. Be thankful. Soak it in. Your quarterback is competent. He looks good. He has all the tools in the world. And that's what's exciting about Jordan Love, man. We talked about it with Trevor Lawrence and Bryce Young, where the thing that scares me about Bryce Young is he doesn't have any tools to fall back on. He doesn't have this crazy arm. He doesn't have this big frame. Like, he doesn't have tools to fall back on that like really raises your floor and ceiling as a passer. He has to thread this needle of being like this small, I don't know, they're calling him like the Steph Curry coming into the NFL. He has to really thread a needle of having the correct play caller and everything correct, everything in place perfectly, where I think when you have more of those tools where you're mobile, you have a big frame, you can take hits, you can shrug off tackles, you can air the ball out, you can fade away. Like Jordan Love had some throws yesterday where he's fading away and throwing absolute laser beams like 35, 40 yards downfield. That can't be taught. That can't be schemed. That is just something that players are born with. Jordan Love has that. So when Christian Watson sucks early in the year or Aaron Jones has been injured and he's playing out of structure and having to fade away and make a throw, he's one of the few guys on this planet that can make that throw and, I don't know what the saying is, but like fit the ball through a keyhole in the middle of a winter storm. That's something that Jordan Love can do. That's what he was drafted for. Now, coming out, you're going to have some hiccups with that, right? Where if you just draft based on tools, you're going to have a rough time, right? Like you could have a Drew Lock, for example. Drew Lock has some decent tools, but the floor is nothing. If it's not there between your ears, it's tough. Clearly, as much as I disagree with the Packers' decision to, they're one game away from the Super Bowl, and instead of drafting assets to help Rodgers get back to that spot, they draft his replacement, which to me is a big mess up, but at the same time, if you can draft a quarterback on a rookie deal, is that ever really a bad thing? No, right? You saw the Jalen Hurts with Carson Wentz thing, and that worked out great. Maybe that's one of these situations, but still, I think Rodgers would still be there playing some of his best ball and not like disgruntled from that pick. So, again, I think it was a mistake at the time, but drafting a kid with tools like that, having him develop behind Rodgers, you can't really go wrong. And to this point, He's been amazing. Last night he puts on an absolute show here where you can see this is a passing chart from Next Gen Passing Stats. 25 of 36, 267 yards, 3 passing touchdowns, plus 14.7 expected points added. One of the touchdowns was 30 yards downfield. Another was like 20. Throwing the ball all over the yard. That one, was it before half? I think it was right before half, but I could be wrong, where fading away, drops it in a bucket to Jaden Reed. Was it a little bit? Was it Jaden Reed or Romeo Dobbs? I don't know. But it was a little bit lucky, but it was also just like God-given arm talent. So really impressed from Jordan Love. He made some big-time throws. I think as well, I think LaFleur gets some of the stink that Hackett does in terms of just like being carried by Rodgers, and it's like, what can you do without Rodgers? I think he's proved at this point. He did have that weird playoff game where he like kicked a field goal even though he was down 2 scores. But in terms of like play calling and just making a good offense, I think he's actually very good at that, which like it sounds simple, but that is rare in the NFL. Just have like a good game planner and play caller. So that's all in place for Jordan Love. They have young wide receivers around him that like are kind of blossoming into good players. And on the entire season, when we look at this is from Ben Baldwin, Computer Cowboy on Twitter, where you can see in terms of EPA, so expected points added, that's just per play efficiency on touchdowns, first downs, sacks, like every play on a per play basis. How much are you giving above what's expected on a per drive, per play basis? He looks good there, along with PFF offensive grade, which is more of a film grade as well. So you can see he's up there right next to Hurts, actually. So it's like Jordan Love in this sort of gap between like Russell Wilson, Burrow, Geno, and you have like your Hurts, Goff, Stafford. So he's not quite there, but I mean, man, anybody in that top right quadrant, especially a guy like Jordan Love, who's, we have to remember, yes, it's like his 3rd or 4th year in the league at this point. He was in the same draft class as Tua and Hurts, but this is his first year as a starter. And he's made such great strides, comes up huge in a primetime game versus the Chiefs, who have had one of the best defenses all year, unfazed, throws laser beams the entire night. If I wasn't before, I am sold on Jordan Love. I think that this is one of the next good to great quarterbacks in the NFL. In terms of how high he hits that ceiling, I don't know, but he's a guy at the very least, somebody that I'd be fine calling like my franchise quarterback for the next, 2-3 years and sort of see where that ceiling caps out. Now, after that, we have Trey McBride, man. Trey McBride, absolute dog. Absolute dog, man. I think it's also important. A takeaway I want to put on top of that is tight ends start slow. And it's something that I really want to hammer home with Trey McBride, because I made the mistake myself where I think I weighted his year 1 too much, where I didn't really even give him much of a chance. He wasn't someone I was really drafting in best ball. You had Zach Ertz ahead of him. Even Zach Ertz coming off of the ACL injury, I was never really in a spot where I was like, yeah, I think Trey McBride can have a breakout year this year. It just didn't really seem likely. I loved him as a prospect, but like year 1 sucked. But we have to kind of understand that tight end isn't like wide receiver in the way that like wide receiver year 1 you suck, it's pretty much over. We've seen it with Sky Moore. We've seen it with N'Keal Harry. Those guys of the world. But tight end's a little bit different, right? Where like Travis Kelce wasn't necessarily a stud in his first year. I think he was hurt most of his first year. It takes time to like truly get up to speed as a tight end, where even now, if you look at the guys like Mark Andrews wasn't doing what Laporta's doing right now in his first year. And that's not to say that Laporta is going to be bad. It's just that year 1 performance isn't the end all be all. Where like Evan Ingram had an amazing first year as a tight end, and he's not in that elite tier with like the Kittle, Kelce, Andrews guys of the world. So year 1 production for tight ends is good. It's good signal, but it's not everything. Like if we look at what Trey McBride did in his first year, like he was bad last year. Like yes, he was behind Zach Ertz, so the production was never going to be there. But we'd have at least liked to see his per route stuff be good. But you can see his yards per route was 0.84. That is brutal. That is awful, awful, awful. 53.6 receiving grade. That's also awful. This year, though, 81 receiving grade, 2.07 yards per out run. Anything over 2 yards per out run, especially for a tight end, is elite. So what he's doing this year is amazing. He had that one stretch yesterday as well where I absolutely loved it. He like catches a touchdown. They call it no touchdown. Like the next play, Kyler comes back to him, targets him. He gets another touchdown. This is, by the way, this is the utilization report from My Fantasy Life. They have a really cool tool where you can compare 2 players, and they'll say who they like utilization-wise more, just in terms of like routes run, targets per route run, just like who has the more valuable usage profile in fantasy football. And week 8 on, so that's since the Zach Ertz injury, Trey McBride has a better usage profile in the eyes of fantasy, my fantasy life, than Travis Kelce, which to me speaks volumes. In this game, he had 9 targets. No other Cardinal had more than 2 targets, which is insane. Like, Kyler Murray hops in, loves Trey McBride right away. Trey McBride looks amazing. You can see here as well. This is a chart from Football Insights. Now, this is from a couple weeks ago, but I still think it's interesting. This is yards per out run on the x-axis from in line, so that's like, hand in the dirt, or maybe not hand in the dirt, but just lined up next to the tackle, just in tight. And on the y-axis, you have from the slot, so that's just lined up in the slot like you're a wide receiver. And it seems like it's a pretty good, I've never seen this before, but it seems like it's a good measure of just kind of like your overall tight ends, because anything that sticks out in a way where Kelce, Kittle, Laporta, Hawkinson are all in that top right, to me, it passes the smell test. So McBride being in that same category as Kittle, Kelce, Laporta, Hawkinson, to me, it's a done deal. McBride, he's a guy, someone who's going to be a top 6 tight end moving forward this season, and then also a guy who's in the top 6 conversation in Dynasty. So Trey McBride, very excited about. I loved him as a prospect, but that's definitely a lesson that we've learned here, where we loved him coming out. You had Dulcich and Okonkwo really shine in their first years, outshining McBride, leaping McBride in terms of dynasty assets, and even in redraft, they both leapfrogged McBride. And I don't think necessarily that a guy like Dulcich was a bad bet anyways. He's been hurt all year. But I think it just goes to show to maybe don't move up Dulcich and Okonkwo so far up, and don't move McBride so far down. Year one can be a little bit sketchy year to year. Now, after that, we have the Joe Flacco debut. As a Jets fan, it pained me to see this one. He wasn't a world beater by any means, but he was not your... I'm trying to think. Recently, how we had a guy just like way past his prime come in and just absolutely suck. You know what I mean? Like he can play, and that's the important thing here. He was 23 for 44, minus 4.7% completion percentage over expectation, which, like, it's not great, but he was fine, man. I mean, 250 plus passing yards, 2 touchdowns, 1 pick. You can see as well, the good thing is he's pushing balls downfield. The 44 pass attempts, only 4 of them behind the line of scrimmage. He had a ton of them past the 30-yard marker. Now, of course, only 1 of those were completed. 1 of those were picks, but it's good to see for fantasy football. Again, he's not a world beater. He's not an amazing quarterback by any means, but for fantasy football, this is a good passing environment where there was 44 pass attempts here, most by any Browns quarterback this season, 250 plus passing yards. You also, on top of that, just have a higher ADOT, right? They're pushing the ball downfield with Dorian Thompson-Robinson was much more of your line of scrimmage targets, and that should be an upgrade for all of the pass catchers in this offense. I think Amari Cooper got banged up in this game, but shout out to, I think it was Dynasty McNamara, but I could be wrong, shouting out these Elijah Moore splits. Elijah Moore now has 7 games played with Joe Flacco from his time with the Jets, and in those games, 11.8 points per game. That's not anything too crazy, but that's really good for Elijah Moore at this point, right? That's a 73 catch, 969-yard pace with Joe Flacco. That's not bad. So maybe you can get some flex value out of Elijah Moore in these Joe Flacco games. And I did want to touch on the backfield. The backfield took a little bit of a weird turn. This is from my Fantasy Life utilization report. You can see up top, Jerome Ford down to 51% of the snaps, Kareem Hunt at 35%. Pierre Strong went from 4%, 3% to now 14% of the snaps. So Pierre Strong is now in there as like a third cog in this wheel. Jerome Ford is still like a fine, like fringy RB2, right? He had 12 PPR, then 14 this week. Kareem Hunt's touchdown or bust. He hasn't scored a touchdown in a little bit here. Unless if I'm missing something, he scored one this week, but I don't think so. And then Pierre Strong is just going to kind of mess things up as like the third running back. So a 3-way committee here is not good for anyone. Jerome Ford is the only one that you can start with any kind of confidence moving forward. Now, after that, we've made it a tradition, if you will, to always talk about Arthur Smith. Shout out Arthur Smith, man. We can see he's now running the offense the way it should, and that's really all I could ever ask for. That's genuinely all I could ever ask for from Arthur Smith, man. He's winning games. He beat my Jets. Now, of course, Bijan didn't really play well. Like, maybe not play well is the incorrect word, but he didn't perform in fantasy. He had 10.9 PPR points, but you have to remember at the same time, this is the Jets defense, where you can say whatever you want about the Jets, but their defense is nasty. Quinnen Williams, like, splitting a double team, or not splitting a double team, but just splitting kind of a, I don't know if it was a zone or a gap running scheme, but the guard and the center and the guard kind of kicked out to sort of try and get an outside zone going. He just splits both of them right through, creates havoc. Ashton Davis comes in, safety. Like, The defense is always playing out of their minds, so it's going to be tough to have a good fantasy game against them, which is just in terms of environment and the distribution of touches and snaps. This is all I could ever ask for. This is truly all I've ever wanted. Now, Drake London had 5 targets in this game, just 1 catch, 8 yards. I mean, that's going to happen when you have Sauce Gardner and DJ Reed on the outside. You can't really fault him much for that. But when you look here, Drake London, Kyle Pitts, Bijan Robinson, the only 3 guys over 25 routes run, perfect. Drake London, Kyle Pitts, Bijan Robinson, the only guys over 5 targets, beautiful, beautiful, Arthur. Arthur has finally figured it out. Bijan, 18 carries, 20-plus touches. Again, Kyle Pitts led this team in targets. Drake London led the team in routes run. This is what it should look like on a weekly basis. Please, please, please do this more moving forward. We have a much lighter span of games here now for the Falcons. You have the Buccaneers, who the Buccaneers defense hasn't been as good as you'd think this year. Carolina's been bad. Colts defense has been bad, and then they also lure teams into shootouts. So that's beautiful. And you have Chicago, who as well, bad defense lures teams out into like low-key shootouts. So potentially London, Pitts, Bijan, all startable down the stretch with, to me, I think Bijan could be an absolute monster over these next 4 weeks or so. Now, after that, we have Mike Evans does it again. I want to take some time. In my younger years, I really didn't appreciate what Mike Evans was doing a lot. To me, he's kind of always fell in the Frank Gore category of like, was he ever the best wide receiver during his time? No, and for that reason, I don't really like the idea of him being in the Hall of Fame, but like, there is something about the longevity of what Mike Evans has been, and Mike Evans has been really good, man. He's been very, very good. He finally hit this week 1,000-plus receiving yards in every season through his first 10 seasons. I mean, that's just insane. Hall of Fame him as well. If you want to look through a player's first 10 seasons, he sits 7th all-time in receiving yards, ahead of guys like Larry Fitzgerald, DeAndre Hopkins, Brandon Marshall, Antonio Brown, Andre Johnson, Reggie Wayne, Michael Irvin. Like those guys, I mean, Terrell Owens, these guys are Hall of Famers that he's ahead of, right? Where he has 11,437 receiving yards to his first 10 seasons, 91 touchdowns as well, tied for 5th most among this list. Just really impressive stuff from Evans, doing with like multiple different quarterbacks as well, from Jameis to Fitzpatrick to Brady to now Baker Mayfield. It's funny, Mike Evans was somebody that we were actually kind of high on in the offseason. I usually don't draft a ton of Mike Evans because he's almost always overvalued as like a 2nd-round pick, but this was the year to do it. I think we have like a YouTube short where I was talking about Mike Evans, so I'm glad that I drafted a good chunk of him this year. Mike Evans, he's been very, very good. He's not even just like, especially this year too, it's not even like he just like limped his way to 1,000 receiving yards, right? Like it's just like, oh my, okay, it's like old Mike Evans with Baker Mayfield. Like no, he is the wide receiver 7 in points per game this year, 61 catches, 1,012 receiving yards, 10 touchdowns on the season, wide receiver 1 in fantasy, and still has plenty more games to like run up the score on this year. Like, he's having arguably one of his best seasons this year, which is what's so impressive about Mike Evans. Now, furthermore, talking about wide receivers, rookie wide receivers in particular here, we have the world-famous rookie wide receiver report brought to you by Underdog. Shout out Underdog. You can see the sign in the back. Underdog Fantasy. If you are new, make sure you check it out. It is promo code RON when you sign up and you're new. They'll match your first deposit up to $100, and you can hop on there and hit the new customer special, Trevor Lawrence, in the Pick'em lobby. It'll be waiting there right for you as soon as you join, and you can go higher on his 0.5 total yards, string that together with some of the other Jaguars, Bengals players, put together a nice little Pick'em slip, right? I believe if you get 5 correct, you 20 extra money. If you get 4 correct, you 10 extra money. 3 correct, 6x. Something along those lines. Just fun to sort of get the Pick'em lines. They have projected rushing yards, receiving yards, fantasy points. Like, honestly, anything you could think of. If you like college basketball, I think Purdue, Iowa's tonight. I think like you could go higher on Zach Edey rebounds if you wanted to as well. They have like the most intricate market across all sports there is. As someone that loves player prop markets, it is absolutely crushing that Underdog is not legal in New Jersey. If it's legal where you're at, I'm telling you, take advantage of it. You can get this free Pick'em special, 0.5 higher total yards on Trevor Lawrence. And if you are new, just make sure you use promo code RON and they'll match your first deposit up to $100. I'll make sure I have a link in the description in the comment section down below for that. Now, when we talk about the rookie wide receiver report, we have the route percentage of these players the last 3 weeks, which is just, on a passing play. What percentage of the time are you running a route on? We just want players that are involved on passing plays. Target per route run, how much are you commanding volume on a per route basis? How efficient are you on a per route basis? Yards per route run. PFF grade, how do you look on film? Now, I will say, we have some guys on Twitter debunking that PFF grade is kind of just a mirror image of yards per route run, which to me is fine, but we also have signal of PFF grade really mattering for rookie wide receivers in particular. And we also have, Zafe, Dontavion Wicks, Jaden Reed, and Marvin Mims are all kind of good case studies of guys having good yards per route run, but not really good PFF grades. So, I don't know. PFF grade shouldn't hold all the weight in the world, but I think it also has a good chunk of signal for rookie wide receivers in particular. Then we have percentage change. So that's just, from last week to this week, what percentage change did your PFF grade do? These are all rookie wide receivers with 165 or more routes. Now, first up, we have Puka Nacua. Super gutsy game. Puka Nacua is a tough kid, man. He got hurt a couple times, had to go out, come back in. And even with just 51% of the routes, which don't be alarmed about, again, that's because of injury, he still ends up with 7 targets, 4 catches, 105 yards, and a touchdown. Not worried at all. Then we have Tank Dell. Super, super, super unfortunate, man. Like, I just feel absolutely gutted for the kid. I couldn't imagine where he was counted out by everyone, including me. I gave no respect to Tank Dell coming out of school. He was a JUCO transfer to Houston, 3rd-round pick. Those guys usually don't end up doing much in the NFL, if we're just being completely honest. And he completely proved everybody wrong. He looked amazing. He was somebody I was buying in on. And he goes out there as like a 165-pound wide receiver. He somehow finds himself in the pile on the goal line. It's tough to point fingers because they probably practiced that play. He's probably been in that play before, and it wasn't really a big deal. But it is pretty mind-boggling to me to ever have a 165-pound wide receiver anywhere near the pile on the goal line. But it is also a little bit of hindsight to be like, yeah, he's going to, I don't know, I think he fractured his fibula. Really, really sucks. You could tell CJ Stroud also requested they draft him, and they did, and then they crushed. So what I will say is what he's done to this point doesn't really make me, the injury doesn't really change much. We'll see how severe the injury is. It doesn't seem like it's one of these ACL, Achilles, brutal to come back from injuries, but I also haven't done enough research, and if it is one of those bridge of the foot, Liz Frank kind of injuries, those are actually pretty brutal, especially this late in the season. But to me, he's done enough. Even as someone that wasn't high on Tank Dell before, he's done enough, man. 23.1% targets per route run, elite. 2+ yards per run, elite. 80+ PFF grade, elite. So I don't care at what time you were drafted, what size you were. If you put up these numbers in year 1, you're okay in my book. So to me, Tank Dell, top 24 dynasty wide receiver with ease, and somebody we'll probably be targeting in drafts next year. After that, we have Rashee Rice. I'm just begging for them to finally just unleash him, bump him to 85% of these routes. Please. But regardless, he's still balling out. He had over 9 targets for his 2nd straight week and looked pretty good last night. Still elite marks across the board here. Demario Douglas was hurt. Zay Flowers on bye. Just in terms of guys we're not going to cover, you have Jordan Addison on bye. Michael Wilson was hurt, and then Jalen Hyatt also on bye, which brings us to Dontavion Wicks. I'm going to be honest. If you go back to some of the earlier rookie wide receiver reports, I was pretty quick to dismiss Dontavion Wicks. I didn't really like him much coming out of Virginia, kind of a whatever-looking prospect, but on a per route basis, he's been good. He hasn't been insane, but to me, he looks very similar to Romeo Doubs last year, where the Packers have done it again. I don't know who's in charge of picking their wide receivers, but they have been very good at spotting these gems, right, with Romeo Doubs last year. Dontavion Wicks, to me, looks very similar to a Romeo Doubs, where 19.1% targets per route run, that's not elite, but that's fine. 1.98 yards per route run, that's amazing, considering a part-time player who's a day 3 pick rookie. And then 73 receiving grade is really solid. He didn't have a great, he had 4 targets, 3 catches or something, but on his routes, he's made the most of them, and that's enough to at least get my ears to perk up on Dontavion Wicks. Now, after that, we have Josh Downs. A little bit of a down game here. 5 targets, 3 catches for 14 yards. Down games happen. It kind of ended up being an Alec Pierce game this week. Michael Pittman also had 16 targets, but Downs had 13 targets last week, and he's crushed all year with Gardner Minshew, so I'm not all that worried about Downs. We have Jaden Reed. He came into the week banged up, so I think that's why the route percentage was lower. Nothing to write home about this week, but I do think with the Christian Watson injury, and we don't know how long that's going to affect him, but Christian Watson injury is going to help Jaden Reed and Dontavion Wicks get more looks, more routes, all of that good stuff, so that'll be good. Next up, we have Marvin Mims. Marvin Mims is tough, man. Mims has not had 25 or more receiving yards since week 4. The only thing really holding up for him at this point is yards per out run, but that's really just on games he had over the first 4 weeks. I'm losing hope. That's really all I can say about Marvin Mims. After we have JSN, to me, this was JSM's best game as a pro. He set a season high with 11 targets on like what was a really fun shootout Thursday night game. The only bummer is he turned 11 targets into just 7 for 62, but I will say he had a drop touchdown that could have gone either way. That would have made the stat line like 8-4. It probably would have been like 8 for 90 and a touchdown, which looks a lot better on 11 targets. So I don't know. To me, it was his best game. I know I was kind of saying like I haven't seen him really look great last week. And you guys did remind me, he did have that one cool one-handed catch, but outside of that one-handed catch, nothing really stood out to me, but he did have a couple of these routes in this game where what we were really big on going into the draft just in terms of like physical wise, we knew he wasn't going to be a big, fast wide receiver, but he murdered the 3-cone drill as like an elite short space guy. And that showed in this game versus the Cowboys where he had a couple of these routes, man. I think like, I don't know, you can kind of call it a whip route. Some people call it something else, but he had a couple of those short area, just like beat the man in front of you within the first down marker type of routes. And he just absolutely cooking dudes, like making a couple of them look silly. JSN, really good bounce back game in my eyes. Still not being all that efficient, but at least he's commanding targets. At least his PFF grade's improving. He's running routes. Still not sold on kind of what we were expecting for him as a prospect, but if we haven't learned from Trey McBride and like now CeeDee Lamb, you kind of need patience. And it's not to say that CeeDee Lamb had a bad rookie year, but CeeDee Lamb didn't have a Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase-esque rookie year, and he honestly had a tier below that in terms of rookie year. Like I would almost compare him to Jordan Addison, but less than Jordan Addison. I don't think that he was even scoring quite the same as a guy like Jordan Addison in his rookie year. But CeeDee Lamb was a guy that kind of started a little bit slow. Year 2 didn't fully break out, but he's just been an absolute monster this year. So JSN, even though he's not having a Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson light the world on fire rookie year, it wouldn't shock me if he was a top 5 dynasty wide receiver in a year or two. So I will give him that credit. After we have Xavier Gipson, he is a New York Jet. Cool story where I think he was like about to get fired, or not fired, but he was about to get let go on Hard Knocks, and they bring him in. They like kind of troll him a little bit, say no, you're on the team. It's actually an inspiring story where he takes McCole Hardman's kick return, punt return job. That he ends up being the reason for McCole Hardman getting traded away. He works his way into the wide receiver rotation, and now he's been a guy who's like running routes because Allen Lazard sucks. Now 8.6% target per run, 0.8 yards per run. Like, we're talking about someone who's just running wind sprints. But he did by far have his best game as a pro. He had 6 targets, 5 catches, 77 yards with the, quarterback play of Tim Boyle and Trevor Siemian. But he looked good in this game, increased his PFF grade by 7.1%, still just 58.9. But some sign of life for Xavier Gipson. He's probably more of a feel-good story than he is like someone you ever put into your fantasy lineup at any point. Then we have Quentin Johnston. It was probably his best game as a pro, but he had another like viral drop that was just really ugly. Outside of that, though, he had 7 targets, 5 catches, 52 yards, which was a season high in targets. Tied for a season high in catches, and then a season high in receiving yards. So pretty good for Quentin Johnston, but still not all that enthusiastic. Trey Palmer and Cedric Tillman, not all that interesting to me. John Mingo with probably his best game as a pro as well, where he had 10 targets, 6 catches, 69 yards, which were season highs in targets, catches, yards, and fantasy points. But with that being said, at the end of the day, we're talking about 6 catches for 69 yards. So it's really not much to get excited about. Funny enough, John Mingo has yet to score a touchdown this year. I'm not all that excited. To be honest, if I could sell high on this game, I would. I still don't really think he's going to ever really be that good, but, maybe I will eat those words on John Mingo. But I don't know. John Mingo, wide receivers, this year's just kind of been teaching me that wide receivers are really tough to evaluate, but I at least can find solace in the fact that we never liked John Mingo, and we were pretty firm on the fact that he was a senior who never really did much, super raw guy. And if I'm going to bet on a raw guy, I don't want it to be a senior. I'd want it to be like a young, raw guy. So Mingo, tough bet to make. I don't know. Maybe he bounces back at some point. Maybe this is more quarterback play than anything else. But to me, Mingo seems pretty dead. Now, before we move on, again, Underdog Fantasy. Use promo code ROUNDUP, match your first deposit up to $100. Next up, we have our seventh lesson learned, which is Achane returns. Thank God he's back. He's in there like swimwear, and he looks absolutely amazing here. Where Field Yates put it out pretty well, or pretty nicely. Week 3, 203 yards, 2 touchdowns, 30 yards receiving, 2 touchdowns. Like, he's just been an absolute menace, dude. This past week, 17 for 73 and 2 touchdowns, 3 catches, 30 yards. Like, he just makes big plays. He scores touchdowns. At this point, even counting the first game where he didn't really even play, he's at 21.4 points per game, which is the RB2 on the year. To me, he's an RB1 moving forward. Now, it is worth mentioning that a lot of his touches in this game did come in garbage time, which I think is fair. Where you can see here from Hayden Winks, he has a chart like pretty much when the game is progressing, and you can see by the time halftime happens, 30 minutes into the game, it just becomes the Achane show. But it's still going to be like a 50-50 split in non-garbage time, and Achane is just so dynamic and efficient that it doesn't really scare me off of him. I'm still going to be firing him up every single week, Achane, as long as he's in the lineup. And I think it's good that he got all these touches in garbage time because it kind of shows that he can now get ramped up to being a full-time guy in competitive game scripts. Speaking of competitive game scripts, David Montgomery gets a huge boost in non-competitive game scripts. So the Lions absolutely killed, or not absolutely killed, the Saints made it interesting, but at no point were the Lions ever down. I think that they had to lead the entire game. And we can see here on the My Fantasy Life utilization report that Gibbs had 46% of the snaps, which is like a low for him since like the first 3 weeks. And David Montgomery had 61% of the snaps, which was the first time he ran, I think like 60% or more. Or no, it was his highest snap share for David Montgomery since week 6. So this was like the perfect game script for him. It's a little bit worrying that Jahmyr Gibbs went down to 54% of the routes and Montgomery went up to 50% of the routes, but I think that that's just what happens when you have Montgomery kind of playing as many snaps as he did to salt the game away, and you mix in some snaps, but you don't want to tip your hand with Gibbs in the rotation, if that makes sense. So I think that's kind of the case in terms of just like the passing game usage of this game for Montgomery. Why take out Montgomery and tip your hand when you're just trying to chew clock on, the end of the game, and you might as well just find Montgomery in the flat or in the passing game or let him run routes, do whatever. So not super worried, but it is just something to note that in games where the Lions are heavy favorites, Montgomery is going to be that guy. And then I also want to talk about Jameson Williams in this game. He scored a touchdown, which is exciting, but he's still not startable in fantasy. I mean, it's a third straight game with over 60% of the routes, but 65% of the routes still isn't someone you can start. Only a 4% target share. Like, he scored a touchdown, but it was off of like a reverse where he got a handoff. So it's tough. I think that he's a very electric player. He's fast. He's explosive with the ball in his hands. But in terms of like you ever putting him in your fantasy lineup, feeling good about it, and then him scoring touchdowns in conventional ways, I don't know if that ever happens. So kind of a tough pill to swallow, but we'll see. Maybe he kind of grows into something here, but I don't know. I think I would probably bet the under at this point. Now, after that, we have the Texans' backfield kind of got shooken up this week. Singletary wasn't effective. You can see from week 12 to week 13, he goes from 81% of the snaps to 44%. Dameon Pierce goes from 19% to 38%. The big thing, too, is Dare Ogunbowale finds himself back in the mix, and he takes 23% of the routes, which puts Devin Singletary from 74% of the routes to 40% of the routes, and 21% of the targets to 4% of the targets. So if this is the case, and we have a three-way split like this is bad news for everybody. Dameon Pierce had a goal line carry where he scores. So that's good, but you can't really take 38% of the snaps and put that in your lineup. Devin Singletary, if he's not going to catch passes, you can't really put that in your lineup. And Dare Ogunbowale, you can't put in your lineup, but he's taking volume from both sides. Something to monitor. But Devin Singletary goes from someone that was like, I think like my RB19 this week to now being a RB3 play where you're like, maybe I'll start Dameon Pierce or Devin Singletary. Kind of what we felt about a couple weeks ago with like Chuba Hubbard and Miles Sanders. That's where we're at this point. It sucks. It's a great offense. We would love to have a running back in there who is fantasy relevant, but if it's going to be a three-way split, it's going to be tough to trust any of them. Also in this game, you had Brevin Jordan. That was the lone bright spot on our sneaky starts video. Brevin Jordan looked good. He wasn't a world beater, but at tight end, you'll take 3 catches for 64 yards all day. He ran 74% of the routes, and now we know if Dalton Schultz misses time again next week, Brevin Jordan is a fine startable option. I think that he actually played well enough to probably work his way into 12 personnel. Now that you have Tank Dell gone, and this team doesn't really seem to like John Mechie, or any of those kind of like next up wide receivers, it wouldn't shock me if we saw more 12 personnel where Brevin Jordan was out there next to Dalton Schultz, but not enough of the time for Brevin Jordan to ever be fantasy relevant without Dalton Schultz going down. And then our last takeaway is Zack Moss had a dud, but the usage was great. It was absolutely fantastic. You can see here from Hayden Winks, he has a fantasy usage model, so just based on your carries, your red zone attempts, all of that. Zack Moss should have scored 23.3 points this week, and instead he did not. He ends up scoring 7.7. But you can see as well as a tweet from Davis Maddox, Zack Moss played all but 4 snaps in the Colts OT win and had every goal line touch imaginable. Sometimes it doesn't work out. So we didn't score points this week. He had a 2.68 yards per carry, which isn't good, but the usage was there, right? He had goal line carries. He only missed 4 offensive snaps. This is somebody you can treat as an RB1 moving forward. I wouldn't be spooked at all on Zack Moss. Sometimes things just don't go your way. Pittman also with a monster game, man. 16 targets, 11 catches, 105 yards, and a touchdown. Michael Pittman, wide receiver 1, rest of season, book it. So that's going to do it for us today. As always, if you enjoy, make sure down below, subscribe, leave a like, and again, if you are new to Underdog Fantasy, make sure you check them out. Use promo code Ron, and they will match your first deposit. I don't even have that other, or no, I have to go. I don't know. I'm just trying to show the Trevor Lawrence thing. But yeah, make sure you check it out. You can go higher on his 0.5 total yards. Get a nice little free space essentially in your pick'em slip. Get a nice little Monday night sweat in on what should be like a pretty brutal game. So make sure you check that out. Again, promo code Ron. Get your deposit matched up to $100. And with that being said, I will see you guys in the next one.
Stones, like this froze, ice cold.